All right, let's do this. For this explainer, we're basically hopping into a time machine. Destination? 2004. We are going way back to the very, very early days of online learning to see how the tools we just take for granted now were first hammered into shape on what was, really, a digital frontier.
To really get a feel for that time, you have to remember what else was going on. In March, Google gives us Gmail, and that 1 gigabyte of storage, it felt absolutely infinite. Then in November, Firefox 1.0 drops, giving us a real alternative to Internet Explorer. And it wasn't just about work stuff. World of Warcraft launched, and it wasn't just a game, right? It was building these huge, living online communities. The digital world was really starting to cook.
So here's the real question. While all that was happening, while we're all freaking out about our inboxes, what did an online university even look like? What did that phrase even mean? Well, turns out it was messy, it was experimental, and honestly, it was a huge challenge.
And right at the center of this whole experiment was a school in Norway called NKI Distance Education. Now, they had this totally radical idea about how online learning should work, an idea that created this massive problem we're going to call the flexibility paradox.
Okay, check this out. A traditional university, you know the drill. They enroll students once a year, in the fall. Maybe a really progressive school would do it once a month. But in KI, they enrolled new students every single day. I mean, that's an incredible amount of freedom for students, but it just completely shattered every traditional model for how you actually run a school.
And this is where that paradox really kicks in, because total flexibility, it led to some serious chaos. With no hard deadlines, students would procrastinate more, and dropout rates went up. And think about this. How on earth do you manage 150 part-time teachers all working from home? And maybe the biggest problem of all, how do you make sure every single student gets quick, helpful feedback when they're all on their own unique schedule?
NKI couldn't just go out and buy a solution to this. Nothing existed. So in the spring of 2004, they did the only thing they could do. They built their own. They literally had to forge these tools out of pure necessity. And these 3 innovations, well, they would go on to change everything.
So, tool number 1. They mandated that every single assignment had to be submitted and graded directly inside their learning management system, their LMS. No more emails, no more lost attachments. Everything was in one central place, creating this permanent digital record of every student's work. It sounds simple now, but it was the bedrock for everything that came next.
And this is where it gets kind of mind-blowing. By forcing everything through one system, they were, completely by accident, logging all this user activity. They were essentially doing learning analytics a full decade before anyone was even using that term. They were tracking data not because it was trendy, but because they absolutely had to.
So now they have all this data, and that data became the key to solving their second huge problem. And just remember this number, 150. That's 150 part-time teachers scattered all over, working from home. How do you keep the quality high? How do you make sure they're being timely? You can't just pop your head into their office.
Their solution was just brilliant. They called it the response barometer. So the LMS automatically tracked the time between when a student submitted an assignment and when the teacher graded it. And here's the genius part. When a teacher logged in, they didn't get a nasty email from a manager. They just saw their own average response time, right next to the school's 2-day goal and the average for all their colleagues. It was pure, transparent, data-driven motivation. And did it work? Oh yeah. The data here tells the whole story. Look at this. In the fall of 2004, the average response time just plummets. It goes from almost 4 days in October down to under 3 by December. Now, a few teachers grumbled about it, of course, but you just can't argue with those results. This one simple tool created a massive improvement for students.
Okay, so the final tool was all about that student procrastination problem. It was called the Individual Planning System. It was totally voluntary, and it let students create their own personal submission schedule. But here's the kicker. The system would then send them automated email reminders if they started to slip, just a gentle nudge at 10 days, 20 days, and 90 days to get them back on track.
But you know, a big tech revolution like this never happens in a bubble. Behind all the code and the servers, there was a very real, very human tension brewing inside the school. It was a classic showdown, old school versus new school.
And the numbers really tell the story here. For decades, NKI's whole identity was built on being a correspondence school, courses by mail. But by 2004, you can see the online student numbers are just skyrocketing, and they're about to overtake the old correspondence model, which was declining. And that made a lot of the senior folks whose entire careers were built on the old way pretty nervous. And this is where leadership becomes so important. The retiring head of the school, a guy named Tore Krogdahl, was an old school correspondence guy through and through, but he was also really smart. He knew you couldn't just throw out the old and jump to the new. He actually pushed back against the tech evangelists, arguing that, hey, those old correspondence courses are still paying the bills and keeping the lights on. He made sure it was a smooth transition, not a chaotic mess.
So now, let's zoom out a bit. Because while NKI was busy solving its own problems there in Norway, all of this was happening inside a much bigger, global conversation that was going on about the future of education itself.
The big idea in the air at the time was openness. MIT had just made this incredible announcement with its Open Courseware project, promising to put all its course materials online totally free for anyone. The idea of Open Educational Resources, or OER, was really starting to catch fire. Even a major textbook on the topic was published with a Creative Commons license. The whole philosophy around who gets access to knowledge was changing.
And what's fascinating is that even in their own little corner of the world, in the Nordic countries, there was no single right answer. You had Denmark, which focused on a blended model that still had in-person meetings. Sweden was pouring government money into these big projects, but they wouldn't let universities charge fees, which kind of killed the motivation to change. And then you had Norway, where private schools like NKI had to innovate like crazy just to survive and compete against free public universities.
So, as this incredible year of innovation was wrapping up, a little personal story from the author of our source material, Morten Flate Paulsen, kind of puts everything into a very different, very human perspective.
In July of that year, 2004, he and his family took a vacation to Phuket in Thailand. People had told them they should probably wait and go over the Christmas holiday when the weather was better, but they decided to just go during the summer instead. A small decision, right?
On December 26, 2004, the massive Indian Ocean tsunami hit that exact coastline. It was a tragedy on a scale that's just hard to comprehend. And it's such a sobering end to the year. A reminder that while we're all busy building our little digital worlds, the physical world just keeps on turning.
And that really brings us back to the whole point. That response barometer, the planning system, yeah, they seem pretty basic now, almost primitive. But their DNA, the core ideas of using data analytics, of tracking student progress, of giving transparent feedback, that stuff is in every single online learning platform that you and I use today.
So, I guess that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. The next time you log into an online course or use any kind of digital learning tool, maybe take a closer look. What ideas, what bits of DNA forged out of necessity all the way back in 2004 are still hiding there in plain sight, shaping the way you learn right now?